Avrupa Parlamentosu İlerici Sosyalistler ve Demokratlar Grubu Başkanı Sayın Johannes Swoboda, finansal kriz ve Avrupa'nın toplumsal dokusu başlıklı keynote konuşmasını yapacak. Kendisini kürsüye davet ediyoruz efendim. Mr. Swoboda, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, I'm very happy to be here again in this wonderful city of Istanbul. And of course, I wish the conference good success. Very interesting subjects have been raised today. The subject of my short speech is financial crisis and the social fabric. What is my theory and my thesis as president of a social democratic group in European Parliament, the second largest group, of course, is how does the financial sector help the economy? How does it not? The minister, the deputy prime minister, just made some remarks, and that is also some basis for my discussion or my short speech. The things have to be in balance. The real sector and the financial sector have to be in balance, and of course, the economy and the social sector have to be in balance. And what I see these days is that the balance is no longer functioning. And therefore we have an economic crisis. Many economists, I would say very short-sightedly, look at the crisis and say it's a crisis of indebtment, a crisis of overspending. I don't deny that this is also perhaps part of the problem, but the real problem is much deeper. The real problem is that the balance between the economy and the social sector and the balance between the real economy and the financial sector is no longer working. Now, why is that? Or what proof for that do we have? Let me take two examples. The first from the US and the second from Germany. From richer countries, not from poorer countries where things may be even worse. In the United States of America, the inequality between the upper and the lower classes of society since the 20s of the last century was going down, but from the mid-80s and the 90s was going up. And at the end, about 2007, 2008, income inequality in the United States reached the level from the 20s. So it was a real increase of income inequality. Let me take an example on wealth in Germany. These days a new statistic has been published. The upper 10 population in Germany had in the year 1998 45% of the wealth, and the lower half 4% of wealth. 10 years later already, in 2008, the upper 10% had 53% of the wealth, and the lower 50% only 1% of the wealth. So it shows, again, an increase in the unequal distribution of wealth in Germany. And as I said, I could bring numbers from poorer countries where the situation would be much worse. Now, parallel to this development, and of course in close interrelation with that, many forces in many countries reduced so-called big government. There was deregulation of the financial market, an over-deregulation of financial market, I would say, and many tax exemption has been given especially to the rich. Look at the debate in the United States about the so-called Bush tax cuts, where we see that the unequal distribution of income and wealth was, of course, promoted politically. All these measures, and I speak about the social fragility, all these measures increased income inequality and reduced growth. And there is a connection, I will show to you, there's a connection between income inequality and reduced growth. All statistics, all empirical studies show if income inequality is rising, economic growth is going down, is reduced. And this is a proof that the imbalance on the income side and on the wealth side is reducing economic growth. Now, what happened in the United States, and was surely a contribution to the financial crisis, was that when politicians, and that started already with Clinton, when politicians saw lower income people have no rise in income at all, and we want also them to afford some housing, for example, so we give them cheap credit so that they can afford to buy land and to buy houses. And this was happened. A lot of cheap credits has been given, too much of the cheap credits, or too cheap the credits have been, and this overblowing of the financial sector in the housing sector and the property sector created a big bubble which then imploded and triggered, together with other effects, the financial crisis. Now, you can say if that was the major reason or not the major reason of the financial crisis, but in any way it was helping to increase the financial sector on the one hand and to increase also the danger of a crisis. Now, it's difficult here for me to discuss with all these experts on the financial crisis some critical elements on the financial markets, but I will come back later to what I said at the beginning. It's about the balance between the financial sector and the real sector, between the economy and the social elements. Recently, a study has been published by the Bank for International Payments and specifically by Stephen Cecchetti and Enis Karoubi, called Reassessing the Impact of Finance on Growth. And what the two gentlemen did, they did an empirical study. How is the financial sector and how is the growth of the financial sector influencing economic growth? And they come to the conclusion, empirical conclusion, after comparing many countries, that an overblown financial sector and a strong growth of the financial sector is reducing the economic growth and increasing inequality. Why? Because the financial sector, and you know it perfectly well, draws many of the resources, intellectual resources, financial resources in its sector, taking it away from the real sector, and therefore, as the authors say, there's a very clear negative relationship. The faster the financial sector growth, the worse it is for economic growth. Or, again a citation, overall the lesson is that big and fast-growing financial sectors can be very costly for the rest of the economy. Again, don't misunderstand me, it's not that financial sector as such is a bad thing, but if it is growing too fast, and if it is overblown in relation to the real economy, it is reducing the real economy and not what it should be in promoting the economy. And it was said here from this rostrum already, I think by 2 or 3 speakers, including the minister, the financial sector is about servicing, and it's called financial service sector, about servicing the real economy and not overshadow and overtaking the real economy. So what do we have to do? First of all, we have to think about more equal distribution of income and wealth. There will always be a difference. But as I said before, it is not now that all of a sudden we have to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, but it is about coming back to the same level and to the same difference we had some years ago. So to go back to the differences we had, for example, in the 50s and 60s, when we had strong economic growth, the income distribution and the distribution of wealth was much more in balance than it is today. And therefore, we need also taxes for that. So when there's a discussion about taxation in the United States, when there was a discussion about taxation in France, you always can say and discuss what is the right taxation. But taxes as an instrument of redistribution is very important. Also in order to have, of course, public expenditure. without having a too high deficit. The Minister Babakan just said it very clearly. We have to have some tax measures. You can discuss which are the right tax measures in order to get public expenditure going again without creating too much of the deficit. And in this connection, because it's about economic growth and about employment, European Union, maybe Turkey is an exception from the European scale, in the wider European scale, but in Europe, public investment was decreasing in the last years dramatically. In the United States, public investment is growing. In China, public investment is growing. Even in Japan, investment is growing. Only in the European Union, investment was going down. And investment is going down, then we have a big problem for the employment, and then we have a big problem, of course, for economic growth. And therefore, we need investment going again. For that, we need money. And sorry to say, but from the financial sector, a lot of money can go into investment if we redirect the money from the financial sector again into the investment growth. And because there's so much discussion, and also in the morning today, about what is the right measure to do, I can also bring in what Paul Krugman and Robin Wells wrote recently for the US, and it's also true for the European Union, when they say, our point is that the dramatic rise in the incomes of the very affluent left us ill-prepared to deal with the current crisis. We arrived at a Keynesian crisis, demanding a Keynesian solution, but Keynes' ideas had been driven out of the national discourse, in large part because they were politically inconvenient for the empowered 1%. And you all know the debate about the 1% and the 99%. It's now, some days ago, it was 1 year when Occupy Wall Street started. Of course, it was much of this demonstration were exaggerated, were irrealistic, were out of the blue, and were not helping to come forward to concrete measures. But nevertheless, I think we should make things clear and change our policies in that sense. So what should we do? Again, as I said before, we have to rebalance the economy. We have to rebalance the economy, and that means we have to regulate also the financial markets. The chief of the regulation authority said it's about effective regulation, and I agree. It's about effective regulation, not about over-regulation. And there are many people who rightly say the regulation should be not too complex in order to be effective. And Sebastian Mallaby demanded recently in the Financial Times, regulators should keep it simple. I agree, but then we have to reduce the complexity of the financial markets. Perhaps, I did not a study, but the Turkish banks have been rather outside the crisis situation because their business was more simple, not in a negative sense, more transparent, more clear than some of the inventions and creations in the financial markets in the United States of America and also in some part of Europe. If you try to find, because you want to be innovative, you want to be creative, again and again, new instruments, new measures, new packages in the financial services sector, packages you don't understand yourself, or perhaps just yourself understand it, but nobody else, then the risk is too high. And of course, then the possibility to regulate it's too high. Because you will need the best people in the regulation authority, but the very few best people with these inventions are already in the financial sector. So if you want to have stability in the financial sector, it is to reduce the complexity of some of the financial services instruments and services packages in order that regulators understand and perhaps even that consumers do understand. Because do you really think that consumers understood the big variety of financial packages and instruments which was offered to them? And as always is said in the European Union, if you create a new yogurt or a new something toy for the children, There are many tests for it if you really can give it to the children, if you really can bring the yogurt to the market. But when there were new creation of new financial instruments, there was no much testing about it. It was just offered to consumers. Consumers didn't understand it. Sometimes the advisors of the banks didn't understand it. And there was surprise when there was a big crisis. Therefore, one of the elements, of course, is, yes, we want simple but effective regulation, and that means that the complexity of the financial instruments have also to be reduced. One element which is discussed now in the European Union, of course, is the limitations for the high-frequency trading, because very often with the high-frequency trading, people don't know what will be the result. They don't know, perhaps they don't want to have the result, but the small push on the button may exaggerate results if other people push at the button at the same time or immediately afterwards, and therefore I think we have to limit especially the high-frequency trading. Then, of course, there's another issue which is now highly discussed in the European Union, the financial transaction tax, because I think it would be fair, and it's a very small taxation, it would be fair that also the financial market is contributing to solving the crisis, which was also triggered by an overblown financial market. So I come to the conclusion of this short intervention. And again, what I said at the beginning, it is about rebalancing our economy. If we want to have a sustainable rebalancing, a sustainable return to economic growth or return to sustainable economic growth, it's not only about what is done now in Spain and in Greece and in other countries, in the sense of that we have to give the countries the possibility to reduce the debt. Of course that is important. But if we want to have sustainable economic growth, we have first of all to rebalance the difference between upper stream of society and the lower stream of society, to come back to a distribution of income and wealth we had in the 60s and in the 70s. Secondly, we have to have more investment, including public investment, into the infrastructure. All our economic activities need that because these kind of investment are helping the real sector. And of course, the financial services can help to produce also this investment. We have to have reasonable taxation, not exaggerated, not to bring people out of the country, but reasonable taxation, to have reasonable public expenditure with, again, reasonable debts, with not overgrowing the debts. And that's also what the European Union has done with the Pact on Fiscal Stability, or with many of the legislations we have in the European Union. And then, if we do these structural measures, which are often very, very more important than some just cutting, as it is very often done in some of the countries, then we can have a return back to economic growth which is sustainable. Because as even The Economist, which is not a left-wing paper, recently wrote, if you just cut wages, salaries, pensions, in a time when there are no new jobs, you just cut demand. And if you cut demand, you will have less jobs at the end and not more jobs at the end. Therefore, the structural reforms, and many of you know probably well the situation in the neighboring Greece, if the structural reform to build up a functioning state, to build up a functioning tax system is much more important than just cutting to come out of the present crisis. And of course, the final point is, of course, as I said, the social balance. Many of the demonstrations we have, and I don't think about the Occupy Wall Street demonstration, but the demonstration you had recently in Spain, in Portugal, and many of the countries, because they feel the economy is not fair to them. When we heard today also the president of the Islamic Development Bank about the fairness and the social balance, this is what is needed. If you want to have a strong, effective financial sector, you should not disregard the necessity to have at the same time more social fairness in our society, which of course leads finally also to a more equal distribution of income and wealth. Ladies and gentlemen, again, thank you very much for having given me the opportunity to say some of these words. And again, it's not against the financial sector, because we need an effective financial sector. But we need a financial sector which is contributing to real growth, which is finally also contributing to a more social and just society. This is the purpose of a financial sector, as it was said already, to serve the real economy and to serve the society. In that sense, of course, I support very much and welcome that Istanbul wants to be one of the big financial centers. There are few cities in the world which are so able to host such a financial sector and financial center as Istanbul, with many possibilities already being in the city. It is in some way also a link between European Union and Turkey, but not only between European Union and Turkey, also between European Union and the Black Sea area and the Mediterranean. So Istanbul is a very, very good place, and I wish you good success in building up the financial center in Istanbul so that I can come again and visit you when the financial sector is really working hardly in order to serve the real economy. Thank you very much for your attention.